Good morning, everyone. So maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about the distinction between reproductive justice and reproductive rights. And folks can hear me okay with my mask on, is that right? Yes, okay, excellent, thank you so much. So reproductive rights is really interested in ensuring that the legal right to access to reproductive health care exists. But where it falls short and where reproductive justice picks up more is in ensuring that the access and all of the surrounding context that is necessary for people to enjoy that right, for people to work through that right, for people to be able to exercise that right exists. So reproductive justice is really focused on the ability that people have to have a child, to not have a child, to parent the children that they have in safe and healthy communities, and have access to full bodily autonomy and self-determination. So when we think about reproductive justice and like what the status of it is, in Georgia, the short answer is that it's abysmal. People's ability to control their bodies, whether that's access to general gynecological care, maternity care, gender-affirming care, is absent in the majority of counties across the state. And in the places where there is access, the laws and regulations that prevent people from being able to access abortion care beyond the point that fetal cardiac activity is detectable, and all of the restrictions on how providers of abortion care are able to deliver that care to people, the ways that it is also restricting how people can fund and support folks seeking abortion. And then in addition, the regulations that prevent people from having the birth experiences of their choosing in the places where they can get the most support for safe maternal care are also being confined by archaic laws across the state. So it's not as if the state is providing the kinds of things that are necessary to allow for folks to have those safe pregnancy experiences, while at the same time denying them the ability to terminate a pregnancy that they don't want. So reproductive justice is completely been abandoned in so many ways by our policymakers. And that has been the case for decades, not just as a result of the fall of Roe, but in the many, many years preceding that. We have seen people's ability to actually enjoy and exercise true reproductive justice continue to be constrained. So we could go for a long time talking about the litany of laws that stand in the way between Black women and Black birthing people being able to have full bodily autonomy, but I know we don't have time for that. So I'll pass it on to Jennifer to talk about the national context.
Yeah, I'm actually
pass it to Desiree. Sorry, Desiree.
You're fine, no. So the work that I do at Amplify is really focused on the local level, and so what cities and counties can do to help protect access to reproductive freedom, abortion access, and like Kwajalein was talking about, what they can do to help have people have the pregnancy outcomes and like desired birth experiences that they want. And so the way that kind of works on the local level looks a little different than it does on the state and the federal level. But I think that we've seen very acutely recently what it looks like when cities and counties don't protect that access. There was a case out of Ohio recently where a woman had a miscarriage in her home and was criminalized for that. There was a case in Texas where a person wanted to have the abortion that she, needed to have, and she wasn't able to access that because of the way that her state and her city and county were policing the way that she could access care. And so a lot of the work that we do is focused on like decriminalization on the local level, and so making sure that people won't be punished for the pregnancy outcomes that they have, whatever that looks like for them. And also trying to make sure that cities and counties are, fighting back against some of these harmful policies that we're seeing on the state level. And so things like funding abortion, making sure that people can access the care that they need, even if they have to go out of state because of our state laws. And so we see that really represented in like law enforcement, and we just heard a panel on policing. And so DAs, prosecutors, they play a big role in deciding how people will be or will not be policed for their pregnancy outcomes. They have a big part in deciding if we're going to prosecute people, who, have an abortion outside of the stated state law, right? They have a lot of discretion in those cases, and I think that we're seeing in a lot of places where they're using that discretion to punish people. And so a lot of the work that we are thinking about and are focusing on right now is how we can stop that from happening, and how can we enshrine into law things that kind of help stop that policing from happening. And so I think that's a big thing right now on the local and county level, is figuring out like what can we do to stop people from exercising their power in harmful ways against Black women, especially because I think that we see that most acutely is Black women are the ones who are being punished for their pregnancy outcomes. And so like how can we stop that from happening? And so that is a lot of the like local work in Georgia that we're focused on.
Thank you. Thanks to the organizers for having me. I'm Jennifer Driver, Senior Director of Reproductive Rights with State Innovation Exchange. I'm going to talk really quickly about the national level. As Kwajalein said, as Georgia is kind of all over the place, nationally we're all over the place as well. And it really, where we are is kind of this fractured landscape for reproductive rights. And Kwajalein's point is really spot on. It's really the legality, not necessarily the access, right? Because even prior to Dobbs overturning, you didn't actually have access in a lot of places. So you had the legal, and there was this illusion of rights, but not actually the rights themselves. And the part of that I wanted to emphasize is it really depends on where you live. The zip code, your state, whether or not you have sex education, right? Because we mentioned abortion. Reproductive justice is so much more than abortion, right? It's sex education, it's maternal health, it's contraceptive access, and yes, it is abortion. And so I think it's important to note that by design, where you live will determine the type of care, the quality of care that you get. I live in Washington, D.C., I'm in Ward 8 there. In my ward, there is not a maternal health, there's not a labor and delivery service where I live. Majority of Black people in Ward 8 and 7 do not have access to this care. And so it's by design. The other thing that I really appreciate about this conversation is really focusing at the state level. So much of our focus has been at the federal level, has been at the courts, looking at what the administration can do, looking at what the courts have done. And what has happened is we've had this over-reliance on the courts that it has allowed it to chip away at all the rights that you actually had access to. And that's by design. If you look at how state legislatures are made up, they are getting older, they're whiter, they're more male, and so the policies that they are putting forth do not reflect the lived experiences of Black women in particular. I love the question about, someone had asked, like, what are the things that you can do? One of those things is you can be an advocate, right? I remember I lived in Georgia 12 years, I went to DC, started doing more policy work. I was the only Black woman around the table working on some of these state and these national policies. And what happens is those policies then get trickled back out, and no one is reflecting the lived experiences of Black women. So when I would talk about the challenges around contraception or the lack of access to abortion, these white women would say, well, we need these things. And I was like, so tell me about your experience as a Black woman, right? And I would get so frustrated because we did not have that representation and the policies that we were bringing forth. So I'll stop there. Kwajalein knows we can go on and on. So I'm gonna pause there, and then I'll pick back up.
Thank you for those responses, panelists. Moving on to question number 2. Can you talk more about your advocacy efforts to shape policy being led by Black women in your state, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, I can definitely start that. So I mentioned earlier, like on the local level, we're really focused on at Amplify, which is a collaborative. We're made up of 9 different reproductive justice organizations. And so Feminist Women's Health Center is a part of the Amplify collaborative. So are organizations like Spark and Urge. And so we have a really wide range of people who are at the table who are helping us decide what our campaigns are going to focus on. And so on the local level, we're really focused on decriminalization because I think that is just something that's so important right now. And it comes up every single day. We're seeing people who are being prosecuted for their pregnancy outcomes, and they don't have to be. And so part of the work that we do is trying to get cities and counties to pass decriminalization resolutions, which state that they will not use their cities or their county's funding or their police efforts or whatever to prosecute people for their pregnancy outcomes. And so that makes people safer when they're self-managing their abortion, like when they're getting their abortion pills online, and they can like manage their own abortion at home on their own. And so it makes people feel safer doing that. When you have a miscarriage at your house, it kind of helps say that the county will not look into that any further. and say they're not going to use their resources to prosecute you for that. So decriminalization is a big one. Funding is one that we really focus on. So for the last couple years, the city of Atlanta has donated $300,000 to ARC Southeast, which is our only abortion fund here in Georgia. And Atlanta became the first city in the Southeast to ever do that. And so that's really cool. This year I'm going for $500,000. You should write to your city council person and tell them that. Let them know. Because it's so expensive to get people out of state to have abortion care. Most people do not know that they're pregnant before fetal cardiac activity can be detected. And so people are having to go out of state, having to travel further. It costs more to get them child care, food, lodging, all the things that go into helping people access abortion care. And so funding, getting cities and counties to put their money where their mouth is on that is super important to me. If you can fund Cop City, you can fund abortion.
Instead of,
like, please, if they gave half the money they were using to build Cop City to people accessing maternity care, child care, abortion care, sex education, we'll be in a much different society, right? And speaking of sex education, that's also something that we're thinking a lot about. Access to sex education is a local issue. School boards have a lot of discretion in what sex education programs they put in place, so that is a local reproductive justice issue. And so we're helping to kind of focus on like cities and counties and school boards, helping them to put into place sex education that is inclusive of queer people, is inclusive of consent, contraception, abortion. Like, you should be having these kinds of conversations with young people. It helps protect them, it helps make them safer, helps them make better decisions. And so those are some of the things that we're focused on the local level. And then we also have state efforts like the Reproductive Freedom Act, which would repeal all of our existing abortion restrictions here in Georgia. And our Fake Clinic Suck campaign, which, if you have not heard of crisis pregnancy centers or these fake abortion clinics, they are places that make it seem like you can go there to access abortion care, and like you will be counseled on all of your options, and then that's just not the case. To learn more about that, you can go to Amplify's website, and we have a page there about Fake Clinic Suck, and there's a map that tells you exactly where all of these crisis pregnancy centers are, all these fake clinics are. And you can just Google CPC map, and it'll pull it all up, and you can see exactly where in Georgia all of these places are. So if you're ever trying to access real abortion care, you know where to avoid.
The couple that I want to just point to, one thing about sex education, we know that Black young people are less likely to receive comprehensive sex education and more likely to receive an abstinence-only program. And so it's so really critical that when we're talking about sex education, we're talking about it really expansively, that it's comprehensive sex education, and we're really clear about what we're saying there. The other thing that I want to say is that there's a lot of legislation around maternal health. Next month we have, next month in April, Black Maternal Health Week, and so we'll be highlighting a lot of legislation and policies that support Black women, led by Black Mamas Matter Alliance here. We know that the biggest risk factor for infant and maternal mortality is the lack of prenatal and postpartum care, and so a lot of legislation being done around maternal health policies. In Mississippi alone, 80% of the cardiac deaths from pregnancies fall on Black women. And we know that an overwhelming majority of those are preventable. Their health departments, their state health have actually said that these are preventable. So it's really important that we're paying attention to that. The last thing that I want to really make sure that I highlight is around the criminalization. And I think you brought that up really nicely. We know that criminalization is this tool for authoritarianism, right? We know that the more that you lock people up, you put them away, they don't have access to building economic power, to access to holding their legislators and their government accountable, right? You can dismiss a large swath of folks. And so they're not able to participate in the kind of the political process. In Kansas, one example of this, in Kansas, you cannot get your voting rights back until you've paid your fines and fees, right? And so who does that ultimately hurt? A large wealthy folks can actually pay and get their fines paid, then they can come off of probation and then they can actually get their voting rights back. So I think it's really important that we are really talking about the ways that all of these things are interconnected, even here in Georgia, where the restrictions around voting, all of these things are have this connection, and I think we do a disservice when we kind of only focus on this one aspect of the problem.
Completely agree. So one of the things I wanted to do was, in addition to talking about some of the things that we're working on currently, I wanted to just name some of the successes that with the policy wins that we have been able to accomplish that have been overwhelmingly led by Black women, queer and trans folks in Georgia. So one that I often highlight is the anti-shackling law, which took 10 years to pass. Folks may not be aware that incarcerated people in Georgia who were pregnant and going into labor, the correction officers were allowed to shackle them to the bed, legs and arms.
Because where are they going?
And so if you can imagine trying to give birth while you are completely constrained and not being able to use your muscles to be able to assist you in delivering a healthy child, because the protection of the correction officers was more important than the safety of the person giving birth or the infant child. So we were year after year after year after year reintroducing this piece of legislation and advocates moving forward to try to bring the issue to the fore. But Black women, including formerly incarcerated people who actually had the experience of being shackled during pregnancy, were the people who were able to bring it across the finish line. And so being able to bring our testimonies, our lived experiences to the halls of the Capitol to talk directly to elected officials who are able to make decisions on our behalf is one of the powers that we have. So this was named in the Q&A of the earlier panel, want to encourage folks. Bringing your personal story, your experience, the things that have happened to you and the people you love, to the people who hold power to make decisions about your life is incredibly important and easy for you to do. And there are many organizations that can help you with the tools and the confidence to be able to hone your story and leverage it to make change for the rest of the state. The other issue that I wanted to name is something that folks are working on currently is the Community Midwives Act.
That's right.
So you may not be aware that Georgia, there are protections or the ability for certified nurse midwives to practice and support birth, but community midwives and other traditional midwives that don't have that nursing licensure are not legally allowed to practice. And so we know that there is a rich history of grand midwives, particularly in Georgia, who have passed on their ancestral and generational knowledge. They are trained, and they often have much better outcomes than the hospital systems do, especially for Black birthing people. And so there is tremendous amount of work and energy being, again, catalyzed by Black women and queer and trans folks to really explain that if we want to make a difference in the maternal mortality rate in Georgia, then we absolutely have to go to the people who are the most impacted, and we have to pull from the communities who are centered, and that is Black women. And so that's active legislation that we can continue to galvanize around. There are only 2 birth centers in the entire state of Georgia, and there's a concerted effort to increase the ability for folks to have the kind of birth experiences that they want as we watch our hospitals continue to close. So the last part of that was like, how do folks get involved? Again, you can certainly call and write to your elected officials, whether they are on the city, county, or state level, but I would really encourage folks to get deeply connected into organizations that can help you to have a direct line, who can help you to hone your skills, who can help you to understand the strategies that work, that get you into the, to get the kind of outcomes that we are looking for when we're trying to shift the hands of power.
Thank you so much. And Kwajalein, with that, you kind of segued us into our next question. So I appreciate you helping me do a little of my work today. Can we talk about what policies are being proposed or have not been proposed, but are not have been proposed and not moving forward, or are not moving forward at all, that could move the needle of reproductive justice in the South?
So one of the things that makes it so difficult is that at the same time as we are working to introduce proactive policy that would make a difference in people's lives, we are trying to either repeal things that have been historically and traditionally harmful to our communities. There's also an onslaught of new things that we have to fight. And so being in a constant defensive posture of trying to stop them from worsening the conditions of people on the ground oftentimes makes it even harder for us to move forward to the thing we actually want. Holding the status quo and just stopping the onslaught of restrictions from coming is not sufficient to change the lived conditions of the people on the ground. And that's what we want to see, is we want to see people's lives change. So we talked a little bit about the Community Midwives Act. Certainly the Reproductive Freedom Act is one piece of legislation that we are really trying to move. This has been an ongoing effort of many reproductive health rights and justice organizations that attempts to address all of the ways over, again, many years, the state legislature in Georgia has attempted to restrict, confine, contort, and outright eliminate access to abortion care and the ability of folks to have reproductive freedom. So, wanting to address the ways that parental notification laws affect young people who are seeking reproductive health care, wanting to affect the ways that advanced practice clinicians are denied the ability to do work that's in their scope of practice, people's inability to use state healthcare coverage to cover their reproductive healthcare choices, like Medicaid or federal or government employee insurance, using marketplace ACA coverage, like those kinds of things that have been barriers that have been inserted along the way, all the way leading up to the result that we've had with the Dobbs decision at the federal court in 2022. One of the things that we need in order to move things forward is people, again, people in the community, along with advocates, to really pressure our elected officials to give some of these bills a hearing, to actually pass them out of committee, and to move them to the floor. We know how quickly, how swiftly they can move when they want to. When they want to get a bill to fly through the process, they absolutely have the ability to schedule a meeting at a moment's notice, try to hold a vote when everybody's not in the room, push it to the committee floor, deny people the ability to give testimony. All of those things are within the toolbox of our elected officials. And yet, when there are things that really affect people's lives, they hem and they haw and they forget to put it on the agenda, or they put it on the agenda but they actually don't move to it, or they don't hold a vote. They give you 2 minutes to testify, and then they turn off your microphone.
That's right.
So all of those kinds of obstacles and barriers that they would prevent us from being able to get the policy to move forward, let alone be able to have it fully implemented and enjoyed by the people who live in the state. So I'll pass it on. I don't want to take up too much time, but it's a frustrating process, particularly at the state level. And Georgia is not the only place where this is happening.
It's not. And again, as spite as that, right? There are times where I will go to state capitals and I will sit there all day just to testify. And when I know that the hearing was, or whatever was supposed to be at 11 o'clock, but I'm still here at 7 o'clock, still waiting. And they're counting on you to leave. They're expecting on you to leave. And there are only so many people who don't have lives like me who can sit around and wait to get on a mic and talk about this. And so it's done on purpose. Desiree brought up CPCs. I think we should stress that one. The other one that's done by Representative Jasmine Clark here was just trying to get medically accurate, like young people to get medically accurate information. You wouldn't think that
there's no law that says sex education has to be medically accurate in
like,
Georgia. It does not have to be.
It's shocking that is the fight. Like, why wouldn't you want your information to be medically accurate? And yet, it has taken years to get, and it's still not there, right? And we're still fighting just to get it to be medically accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a really big one. That's medically accurate, and so that's a really big one. I think seeing in the city of Atlanta recently how the referendum process has been going. People want to have a vote on the Stop Cop City movement. Like, we want to have a say in that. We live here. We should have a say in how our government is spending money, right? That's right. But we don't because they don't want us to. And like, if they did want us to, we would. And so I think Kwajalein really pointed to that earlier, talking about how if they wanted us to be able to testify and like if they wanted to vote on these things in committee, we could. And so I really think like holding feet to the fire is just so key right now. And like sex education, we want to pass the Reproductive Freedom Act. They have not had a hearing on it, and it's been introduced for 2 sessions now. That's correct. And so we're gonna have to reintroduce it next session because of the way the legislature works. And so, pressuring our legislators to put a hearing hearing on for it will be a big thing. And things like funding. DeKalb County, I'm in conversation with DeKalb County right now, trying to get them to donate money to ARC Southeast like the city of Atlanta has done. And I'm having conversations with their commissioners talking about, we don't know if that's legal. We don't know if we can do that. And like, you can, you very obviously can. They've done it in places across the country. They've done it in other cities and localities here in the state. And so like, this is something that can be done that they just don't prioritize, right? Because if it was a priority, it would be done.
The state found money to fund the CPCs.
They get at least $2 million in the state budget every year for fake clinics that don't do anything except lie to people.
That's right.
And so they find the time, they find the money, they find the effort to prioritize all of these other things. And so when we say things like reproductive health matters, and like you should be funding abortion care, you should be funding maternity care, you should be letting people be able to access abortion care using their insurance, people should be able to use their insurance at birthing centers. Government employees, state employees get 3 weeks of paid family leave when they have a child. You're not even like fully healed up and ready to like be a person again after that. And so like things like that, like there's no reason they can't be 6 weeks or 8 weeks or beyond that. And so like I think the makeup of the legislature makes a difference in that. It's a bunch of old white dudes from like rural Georgia, and I'm from like rural Georgia, so don't let me make that sound derogatory. But like it's all these people who don't have experience with these things who are making decisions for people like us who do. And so I think that, yeah, I just keep coming back to, we have to hold these people accountable. We have to start calling people stupid in public. I know that's really mean, but we do. We have to like, we have to start like being mean to our legislators, because the things that they're doing are very mean to us.
Right.
And so like that's just me. That's not on like behalf of my organization. I just think personally we have to start being mean to legislators again.
There's two things that I want to just say. Yes, holding them accountable. The thing that frightens, that makes me a little concerned is the role of black women legislature in the state houses, and the weight that they have to carry to get things moving, right? The way that folks come for them in the state houses, right? White women can get up and say, oh, well, I never actually thought I was going to run an abortion, but here I am talking about it, when black women have been fighting for this for decades. And you're like, hey, I've been saying this, and they don't get endorsed at the same rate as their white counterparts. So the number of black women,
legislation doesn't get heard at the same rate. They're introducing these things. Like Jasmine Clark has introduced this every year that she's been in the legislature trying to get sex ed passed, and it just doesn't get a hearing. Nobody cares.
And so my fear right now is the number of black women, particular legislators, who are saying, I just can't do this anymore, right? And so what are the ways that we are supporting, that we are holding black women legislators and legislators, and calling out the ways that the things that they have to deal with, even as being elected, right? The racism, all of the things, the harm that happens in communities does not stop when you become a legislator. And so I think that that's really important to name. The one last thing that I will say, that my other fear right now in this kind of reproductive moment is personhood bills.
Oh my God.
We are seeing more and more the redefining of when life begins. And what happens, the ways that people are criminalized for defining a fetus, an embryo, as a full person, right? And so that will have devastating impacts on black women who are already surveilled at higher rates than their white counterparts.
And I just want to make clear that fetal personhood is already the law of the land in Georgia. So I want to make that abundantly clear. Within the 6-week ban that was passed in 2019, that was enjoined until the Dobbs decision in 2022 and allowed to go into effect in July of 2022, it includes language that defines a person to include a fetus or embryo at any stage of development in the uterus.
That's right.
It does make some clear distinctions between it and IVF, which makes it a little bit different than what's happening in Alabama. But at any stage of development inside the uterus is defined as a natural person in the Georgia Code, meaning every single place that natural person occurs in the Georgia Code, its definition includes a fetus or embryo at every stage of development in the uterus. that could have lots of implications. We are really in an untested environment because we don't know how prosecutors might decide to enforce that law. What they have said in our many pieces of litigation against the 6-week ban is that it would not prevent abortion providers from being able to provide care before the point at which fetal cardiac activity is detectable. But that does not mean that it is extends to protect people who are carrying that pregnancy or people who are around them that might affect that pregnancy, including other kinds of physicians. So it's incredibly dangerous, and it is the law today in the state of Georgia.
And it's not, I mean, we say what it is now. The ultimate goal is a total ban, right? Like, the ultimate goal is to stop. And so even in Alabama, right, anti-abortion legislators were pushing the point to see what was publicly acceptable. And when there was outrage, right, that was like, oh, okay, hold on, we're going too far. But ultimately, they are going to claw back to get back to that point. It is just testing the limits to see how far they can go where there will not be this outrage, right? There used to be an outrage at 15 weeks. Then there was an outrage at 8 weeks. There's an outrage at 6 weeks. And now, so they're just, the goal is ultimate, a total ban and total control over how you live your life.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that feedback. That was definitely a great point in the conversation. For the last question, let's talk about what does true policy win look like? How do we ensure that we are not left behind as Black women? And would you be able to give an example of a policy win that did not yield much for us?
Oh my gosh, can I?
Yes, go
I'm
for
sorry.
it.
This one,
Take
it away.
I was like,
Get heated.
I was like shaken when I first read this question. One of the things that I really struggle with is that how we define a win, right? We are so set on if a bill passes. And so what happens is when you have policy divorced of building power, you have short-term wins and long-term losses. And so what you have is like, yes, I will celebrate that bill passed. A new legislature will come in and take that all away. And so now you have celebrated, here we are, and have rested on your laurels. And to Kwajalein's point, we haven't actually built the thing that we were actually trying to build. And so what was a policy thing that was Roe? Roe was the thing. Roe was never enough. Roe was the floor. Roe had, it was just bad, right? Like, and it defined legal definitions and made it medical, right? And so you had a bunch of lawyers who never went to law school, probably didn't go to medical school. So you had a bunch of lawyers who didn't go to medical school, probably didn't do well in law school, defining medical definitions for life and how I control my body. Roe was a failure. And when I think about in this moment, we are building back so much more than Roe because Roe was never the thing.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent example. And one of the things that I fear is going to replicate that exact same scenario, I hate to do it, but some of these ballot initiatives.
Oh my God, the ballot initiatives.
So it is exciting because what it affirms is what we've always known, is that the majority of people think that abortion should be legal. The majority of people actually don't care. If we're really honest about it, the majority of people are like, why is this my business?
That's right.
But one of the things that frustrates me so much about the ballot initiatives is because in the language of those ballot initiatives, so frequently we are starting from gestational limits.
Yes.
And gestational limits, just so folks know, is saying like when in pregnancy abortion is good or bad, when it is appropriate or inappropriate. And what we know is even if abortion is relatively rare at later terms in pregnancy, it is critically important for the people who need it.
That's right. Yep.
And so if we start from that concession by saying some people should not be able to have the health care that they need, we are starting from a deficit. We are leaving people behind. And so rather than, at this point, while Roe is gone, why not shoot for the moon? Why not actually demand exactly the thing we want, rather than conceding and compromising before we're even forced to? Because of our timidness, because we just really desperately want the win, because we want to gain back some momentum, I am much more interested in, again, having the conditions of people's lives change
right.
than I am in us having a piece of paper that we can wave in the air and say, look, Joe, we did it. That's not sufficient. That's not sufficient.
So Quadrant is actually being really kind when she says this, because these concessions aren't from the other side. They are from our side. I don't have to worry about what the antis are doing. We do it to ourselves before they even get a chance to do it. They haven't even asked. Joe.
Don't get me started on Joe.
We are nonpartisan up here.
We hate them all. No, one of the things I struggle with, and I've talked about it here today, is like funding, right? Like I think it's a win that the city of Atlanta has funded abortion for the last couple of years, right? But there's nothing to say they have to do that every year. Like there's nothing written down in the city of Atlanta's code. There's nothing like in the state law or anything like that that says they have to give money to ARC Southeast or they have to create their own reproductive justice fund or anything like that. And so while I celebrate that every year, I'm like, yay, I did it, we did it, it's a win. But there's nothing like making that permanent and nothing like making that sustainable. And so like when we're trying to replicate those efforts in like Fulton County, one legislator can say, no, I'm not gonna vote for that. And so we just don't get that money from Fulton County, and the people who need their abortions don't get that funding. And so while I do paint that as a win, it's also not something that has to continue to happen. And so I spend a lot of my time figuring out like, how can we make this permanent? Like, how can we get this written into the city budget, which is like the ultimate goal? Like every year, the same way the state has a line item in the budget every year for crisis pregnancy centers, which again are just places for people to get told lies. There should be a line item in these city and county budgets every single year that says we are going to give money for reproductive justice in whatever context. Like the city of San Antonio in Texas has a reproductive justice fund, so people can use that for things like doula care. They can use it for prenatal care. They can use it for their delivery costs. They can use it for like diapers and child care. So it's very expansive. And so I think it would be great if we had something like that. Like that is something, like if we had that enshrined in the city or county budget, and it was like for expansive needs, so people can use it for abortion care. Right. Like that would be a win for me. And like the way that the city of Atlanta has done it now has been good, but it has not been, I would consider like an overarching win. It leaves people behind. Yeah. It's not allowing people to, you know, be able to afford midwives or doulas, or it's not helping them get the prenatal care that they may need. It's not helping people fund time off if they need more time than 3 weeks off work, right? And so like that is something that I consider like it has been like on paper a win, but in like practice it is definitely leaving people behind in a way that I do find concerning, and it does like keep me up at night.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of your points today. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Do we have any questions from the audience at this time? You can please come up to the microphone if you have questions. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you all for the valuable information given today. My question is in regard to a lot of the information that you all gave out today, the civic organizations. I'm kind of assuming that since it's a policy conference, a lot of the students here are in those spaces, policy spaces. But I was wondering things of like where you can go to find information for who voted on what. You mentioned civic justice organizations, voting history, budget expenditures. I'm not a college student anymore, but like I was an undergrad major, and I just recently moved back, and I'm like reintegrating myself. But I think one thing I've noticed within our community is there's a lot of assumption, especially with, I'm a millennial and Gen Z, that like it's like, hey, do this, da da da, but like we actually don't know or may not know where these things are. So we have missed that in the translation because it's like, hey, do this, and they go on to the next thing, but like, you didn't tell us how to do this. You didn't tell us where to find this information. It echoes back as far as like children, our parents do the same thing to us. So just as a way for myself, but if there's anybody else here, you spoke of like civic justice organizations, voting history, who voted on what they believe in, budget expenditures, and a strategic plan, like where would we go to find that information? Thank you.
That's a really good question. So the best way to find out like who voted for what is unfortunately the state legislature. For the state level is the state legislature's website, and it helps if you know what bills and bill numbers and stuff you're looking for. And so different organizations do different like legislative meetings and all that kind of stuff. Feminist does a power hour every month where their lobbyist talks about the things that they're watching. And so, not to sound like a millennial, but you should really follow some of these organizations on social media and get added to their email lists and stuff, because that's where they share so much of it. And so, like, for when I'm trying to figure out, like, what are reproductive justice organizations in Georgia focused on right now, I will go to Feminist website, their Instagram. So it's at Feminist Center, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yep. And so that is a good place. That is a place where I go when I'm trying to figure stuff out. And I think for other organizations, Amplify Georgia, our website is amplify-ga.org. We're made up of 9 different organizations, and we link to all of their websites and all of their social medias and stuff from our website. And so organizations like Sister Love and Sister Song, who are doing some really crucial work. Spark, who is doing some really great work around like the queer and trans community and helping to protect them and provide access to different resources for them. URGE is a great organization if you are currently a student. URGE has student organizations on campuses across the state. And if they don't have one at your school, if you get in touch, you can figure out how to start one at your school. And so like there are definitely ways for you to get involved with that. As far as stuff like budgets, that's very high level stuff. Ooh, go ahead. Yep, do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's an organization called the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. They do trainings often. They usually put out a state report. They talk about all the different areas of the state budget, and they talk about economic justice in general and how it affects different parts of the state and different issue areas. So there are many, many organizations that are looking with a fine-tooth comb at exactly the thing you're looking for. And as we move into the election cycle, so the state legislature runs for re-election every 2 years. So this is an election year not just for the president, but for every sitting member of the state the state house. And so it's incredibly important for you to be able to see, again, exactly what they stood for, the bills that they co-signed, the things that they voted for, the things they were silent on, because all of those things matter when you go to the polls. Again, we want to make it crystal clear that the president and Congress are not the only things that are important to affect the way that you live in this state. Your governor, your state representatives, your city council members, your county commissioners, your sheriff, your judges, there are many, many positions on those ballots that affect your life every day.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning again. My name is Sailor Walton. I'm a first-year poli-sci student. My question is to the whole panel. Where do you feel like the disconnect is? The fact that we're in 2024 and you're the only queen at those tables, you're the only queen waiting hours and hours to ask your questions, to be able to have the mic. Where do you feel like the disconnect is? When we have these conversations, it'd be like, it's a black community, we don't do nothing, we lazy, it's a white man. You know, where do you feel like the disconnect is?
I think it's in hiring, honestly, right? Like, it took a long time for me to even get the position that I had, and there were all of these barriers for me to even get a policy position at that level, in a different level. So I think as more people, like, for example, from my organization, as more people come into these places where you have the ability to hire more black women, that is one of the ways that you can get more people into these positions. I really do think there's a disconnect between the hiring.
It is absolutely not a lack of talent. I want to make that really clear. And Atlanta and Georgia is a really good example of places there's tremendous black leadership across the state. And so there are opportunities for folks to see black people in positions of power. Now, we still got to hold them just as accountable as we hold everybody else. So I want to make that clear. It's not just about representation. It's also about the values that they espouse. But there are many places where there are black executive leadership, black elected officials, black regulatory leaders. Most of the organizations that we represent are led by black people. And so it's not a dearth of talent. It's not a dearth of skill.
And I also, just real quick, like the reason that there aren't as many like people that look like us at these meetings and stuff is because of when they have them, right? Like people are at work. My best friend is an elementary school teacher. She doesn't not care about the education policy stuff that's going on at the Capitol. It's just that they're having a meeting at noon and she has a class, like she's teaching school. And so like they do these things during the day when people are at work on purpose. And so like it makes it hard for us to engage because they don't want us to. And so people have to go out of their way, take time out of their work, take time away from their kids to put in the effort to like go to these meetings and stuff. And that's all very intentional.
We will stay off after also to answer any
Yes.
questions that we didn't answer.
Okay, we'll take this last question. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Hello, my name is Shemaya Gavin. I'm also a first-year political science student. My question was, this is for the entire panel as well. Have any of y'all worked directly in in the healthcare system? Okay. What did you do?
So I'm not a clinician, but so my organization is a healthcare facility. So we are a reproductive health rights and justice organization, meaning we do advocacy, outreach, education, but we also have a clinic that provides abortion care, GYN care, gender affirming care, birth control, breast health, et cetera. We're working to add prenatal and postpartum care to our services. So we're providing direct services, direct health care to people every single day.
And then my second question to that was, what led y'all to want to advocate for reproductive justice?
I will just say my lived experience. Wait, I grew up in Alabama. There was not a lot of access to health care when I was in undergrad, and I kind of fell into it that way of like trying to navigate, trying to get to health care.
I would say similar. My mama had me when she was 16 and my sister when she was 19, and I just think all the time about the opportunities that she would have had if she had had access to sex education earlier, and if like the community was more supportive of young parents and like access to that. Like she didn't graduate college till I was like 10, and because it took so long to do all that. And so like just like the lived experience and like my background really put me in this place. I don't think I was ever gonna do anything that wasn't reproductive justice.
I had a very windy road that I won't go into, but I will say part of my like Black feminist education at Spelman was certainly like a foundation for like connecting to the work that I do, and also the influence of my mother, who's here in the corner, who worked in reproductive justice while I was in college as well, and worked at Planned Parenthood in St. Louis. So those connections and really the ability to like center Black people and Black people's experiences what has helped me to stay connected to and rooted in reproductive justice.
Thank you. So again, let's thank Desiree, Jennifer, and Kwajalein for joining us today. Thank you.